All right, Jim. Well, welcome to our little interviews that we're doing to celebrate our 100-year anniversary. And as I've asked everybody, even though it seems redundant, to share your name and how you came to be with MWI and how long you've been here.
Okay, well, my name is Jim Endres. Been here 43 years. Got here right out of college. Kind of didn't know anything about the area. I was at USF up in Tampa and sent a letter down in the area, and Dad said, "Come on in."
Right.
And so there was no job listed as being, we're looking for somebody.
Right.
I just stepped in and said, "Hey, I'm fresh out of school. Could you use me?"
Right.
And they said, "Well, we'll think we can fit you in someplace, I guess."
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it started. And I got plugged in doing testing. And from there, it branched on out.
Right. And what was your background degree in?
Well, it's just mechanical engineering. I was actually the first mechanical engineer here. I mean, there was other engineers, but not in the mechanical.
Yeah, they were all agricultural engineers that like dad was and myself and stuff like that. But yeah, first mechanical engineer company hired.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually was the first one to have a personal computer here too. The first PC way back then was in the test department, so we could use that for calculating testing data.
I remember that computer that was up in there, and that was when we first started to see FEAs required in some jobs. I think you were having to run some of those FEAs, and it would take probably overnight or a few days on that computer.
It was actually we had upgraded through an XT to an AT, if those acronyms mean anything anymore. But yeah, we started doing FEAs, and it was you hit press go to do the calculation, and it might be 7 or 8 hours before it finished calculating. And they weren't near as involved as they are now, but computer speed's quite different.
Yeah.
But yeah, back then I also, because of having a computer, I programmed it with a spreadsheet to do affinity laws so that we could do pump selections and custom choose the sizes and speeds and so on, which prior to that, it was just whatever, like your dad had done. They tested a pump, they got a curve, and that was it.
Right.
You didn't, you know,
Model the other pitches that you could do to see what it would look like on the curve.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we got that set up, and then sales went wild with it. So that was kind of neat.
You developed all the P-series curves and stuff like that that we could then, when we built one, test and say, hey, the program and affinities laws work just like they're supposed to. Yeah, that is pretty cool. So now you have a few different, I mean, you ended up getting your professional engineering license while you worked here. And you also, I think, studied a few other things that you got interested in vibrations, didn't you?
Yeah. Yeah. Didn't even know it existed, the Vibration Institute, or any ratings that you could take to get qualified at different levels. But was out on a project, and there was a guy who was doing vibration analysis. And so he told me about it, and I went and looked it up and found a local chapter for Central Florida, joined in, then started learning a lot more about the vibration analysis and measurement portion. And there are 4 levels. And one was pretty easy. Actually, they made it where you could take level 1 and 2 at the same time. So I went straight for that, passed that, and then 5 years later, did some more classwork and passed level 3. But if you were to look at how many people that are in the industry through the Vibration Institute in each of the levels, there's a bunch of pages of 1, less pages of 2, pages of 3 are small, pages of 4 are real small. But yeah, I had made it up to at least that part. I didn't chose not to bother with the 4. That's the guys who do it daily.
Right. Probably checking the vibrations on a rocket for SpaceX or something. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting technology. I mean, science, because I think you've heard some stories of different things on how it all works. And the other hobby I think that I've always been interested in, that you always had a plaque on your wall about being an SAE. You know, a lot of engineers, mechanical engineers and stuff like that, might be good at designing things on paper, but you've always been quite mechanical with your tools and wanting to get in there and fix things and take it apart and see how it works. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I know I've looked at hiring engineers and stuff and you know, for the company, one of the things I always look at, because I know that having you around with your mechanical engineering background, but also being able to pull up your sleeves and get in there with a wrench just makes us all better engineers. So I always look for people when we hire them to see if they have hobbies or, you know, like being an SAE or automobiles and stuff like that. So they don't design something we can't take apart and fix.
Right.
Yeah.
When you've spent a little time taking things apart, fixing them, putting them back together, you understand that aspect and how the engineering can include that in your design work. But yeah, I from the side hobbies of working on the cars and actually being licensed, if you want to call it, or certified in SA or in ASE. But then playing around with race cars, that's like a physics lab all in one spot and all kinds of stuff. But yeah, it definitely helps. Um, yeah, speaking of that, going back on when I started here, some of the things that was available to me that probably somebody else that came out of school that I was or went to school with, um, they might have gone into like a consulting company or something like that. And here we have machine shops, welding, fabrication. So this was the first place I ever got my hands on machinery and did some things on a lathe, on a milling machine and so on. Did a little bit of welding. I wouldn't call myself a welder, not by a long shot, but I did stick some metal together. Um, but that also helps as an engineering when you understand what the machining part of it is, or the fabrication part, you understand better how to make the design so that those guys can do their part.
Right. Yeah, it's a good background skill on your hobby with the cars and stuff. I have a fond memory of that because you let me race that Nova that you had put together, and that it was one step up from a demolition derby. After I was in it, I realized that. But that enduro race we did out in Davie, and that was fun. Except I was hooked on the wall for quite some time. But it was and learning how not to spin around on the track and get everybody to yell at me. But that was a fun experience. I was glad you let me do that car you put together. So it was fun. I think I got a picture of it with everybody's signature on it somewhere around here. So going through some of these questions, over the years, how have you seen MWI Pumps evolve and adapt to changing times? What are some significant milestones you've
Well, I guess some of it is that when I first started, we weren't getting into any projects like Army Corps and things like that. Some of the more detailed municipal jobs, we seemed to be more agriculturally oriented. But we had moved into grabbing and getting involved on some of the core jobs and more municipal jobs. And that definitely opened up a lot of areas for us. Let's see, as far as other changes, um, just as times go on and things are available, tooling, uh, the the solid modeling ability that we adapted or included uh, made a major difference on how we manufactured drive units, for example. Um, Back then, it was the guys on the floor just tried to put something together. They just didn't have a whole lot of guidance. The drawings just weren't there. But now that's definitely a better guidance, and the quality of the equipment now is so much better. The good old days, uh, when the drive unit and water pump ended up out in testing, we probably spent half of the time modifying it out there just to make everything work right.
Final quality control checks, they're happening in the test tank.
But now they show up and they're ready to roll. We don't have any problems. We hook them up, run the test, and ship it out.
Yeah, we get to deal more with the exceptions instead of the rule. Yeah, yeah. In fact, when you started, we didn't have a whole, I mean, quality was always everybody's job, but we didn't have the whole quality control department, you know, that we set up by, gee, it's maybe been 30 years now. ISO 9001 and certification, the 14,000 we just got, all the self-priming pumps we produce now for our, you know, our rental fleet and other customers. You know, we do a lot of things different. The machine shop you talk about, running lathe and stuff, just the whole transformation we're getting ready to do on that to bring us up to really state-of-the-art NASCAR type machining, which is going to be really cool transition over the next few years.
Yeah, all the computer controlled equipment that we have in the shop now has greatly improved the quality and the accuracy of the parts as we put them together.
Yeah, going from making a shaft in 3 hours down to 20 minutes for some of the stuff, which is pretty cool. Significant projects and achievements. Can you talk about any project or achievement you're particularly proud of during your time at MWI Pumps?
Well, I guess one of the things is that when we built drive units, I kept looking at the hydraulic tank. Oh, these things are just huge. Why do they need to be that big? And so I started experimenting a little bit with very small tanks relative to the horsepower and the size of the tank that we normally would have put on there based on industry standards. And I kept looking at it saying, why do we need a tank this big? And I basically got 3 answers. And one was it cuts down on aeration. It's there for filtration and cooling. I went, we have coolers on it, so we don't need it for that. We have filters in there. We don't need it for that. But it was just one of those things that from way back, the old school way, that's what they did. But we didn't need it anymore. But nobody moved off of that base. So I kept saying, why do we need to do that? And I kept getting, well, that's the way we've always done it. And I can't stand hearing that's the way we've always done it. It's like, okay, so I said, well, if I have cooling and filtration taken care of in other areas, let me see if I could just work a way to keep it from being aerated.
Right.
And so I kept making the tank smaller and flowing oil faster and faster through it with minimal baffling in it, and succeeded in having tanks that I had actually made mine 1/10 of the size. And we chose not to go quite
that small, because then we had secondary issues like filling up the hydraulic hoses for the first time. Yeah.
So, but we did battle all the customers who felt like, no, you can't do that. We go, but we are. And so it was actually better for the customer not to be carrying that much oil. Oil changes were a lot less involved. There were other advantages, but there was just no real reason to have that huge tank. And so that was something I think we made a big change in the industry.
I agree. I haven't seen it, you know, I haven't seen a lot of other people do it quite to the degree that we have. But even though that tank looks fairly simple from the outside as a square box a little bit, I remember all the different tests that we did with open lids and staring at it and trying to do everything you could with the right placement of the baffles and the way that whole interior is designed. Took a lot of different trial and errors till you perfected it, and that was pretty cool. And yeah, that is something to be proud of, because we put them out there every day. And now that we're, you know, even though we still use a lot of our coolers on the pump designs, you know, now that we're going to radiator type coolers as well, right on the engine, since those costs have come down and we're able to adjust the fans to just maintain that oil temperature at exactly what we want it for most efficiency. Those smaller tank designs all fall into that same future development that we're doing now that we couldn't have done had we not taken the stepping stones to perfect it through those years. Yeah, pretty cool stuff. In what ways, companies' impact and contributions, how do you think MWI Pumps has contributed to flood protection, drainage, water control around the world? And can you share any examples where you think our pumps made a big difference? Of course, you live out in Coral Springs, I think. That whole community is dewatered with our pumps.
Exactly. Yeah, that's it's one of those times when you go to the water board meeting and you say, well, that's nice, but I actually live in this territory, and so this one's important to me, where some of the other people weren't in that area. But as an engineer living in the area where those pumps took care of, I had a little more interest in them.
It's home.
Yeah. But not that any job I wouldn't want to do, conscientious job for somebody just because I don't live there. I'd always want to do that. But the probably one I'd still think of that we made a major change or help on was all the pumps we put in New Orleans after Katrina. That was quite an interesting project. It was interesting even at the beginning when we went in there to not really necessarily call it putting in our bid, but there was a whole lot of different companies sitting around a very big table in New Orleans with the Army Corps, and everybody giving their ideas on what they thought could be provided. And all the other companies had never built anything. They just had all these ideas. And we're standing there going, but we've already built the pumps that we're suggesting. And you already own them in Louisiana. So you've already experienced that these things exist and work. And all we're suggesting is getting a lot of them. And so the big thing, I guess, was to be able to produce that many in that short a time. But having already had the design ready to go certainly helped us take care of that, at least that city, and be prepared for anything that might show up. And I think they did have another smaller hurricane that they came on, ran through, and did their job.
And they still do, when they put in the ultimate permanent stations that they put in many, many years later. We on a bunch of that equipment, we ended up purchasing it back and put it into our rental fleet, and it's still out there working today. So it's the durability of it. Cultural traditions. Any funny stories that you have, unique events, something that you recall that makes you smile or laugh?
Probably a few, but maybe I shouldn't talk about them.
Well, when we get Mike Iannucci on it, I'll have to tell him, hey, be careful about some of those stories you've written down. We're not publishing that book yet, but yeah.
They're interesting things that happen in the field and so on, but just leave it alone, I guess. It's things that we talk about amongst ourselves, but
we definitely try to laugh and have fun around here. So I think it's a good thing. On any particular core value that we have as a company out of the four: no fear, love, self.
Well, one of the things I want to say is, we don't tout this as a basis for our company or anything like that, but we're based and grounded by Christian values, and I think that matters a lot. It matters on how we treat customers. It matters on how we treat each other, just amongst ourselves. I think it has an underlying effect that we don't really say anything about it, not publicly, but it's there. So I appreciate that portion of it, and I think it has a big effect on how the company operates.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. You know, Dad already said it's God's company, and we wouldn't be here without a bunch of, you know, special grace, blessings, and difficult times that He's gotten us through. But yeah, my sister and Darren and I, we always talk about, you know, do we put something on our website? A lot of companies, you know, promote that as part of their core values in terms of stating that they're God-owned company. Dad was always very adamant that we don't do that. And I still have his notes from when we discussed the last. Because we, of course, we do business all over the world. We have a lot of customers that don't always have the same beliefs that we have. And Dad's like, you know, your witness always has to be an individual thing. You know, a company can't be a Christian. It's a company. And people, you know, you can't require everybody to be Christians. You know, they have to believe that and want to follow it. So, you know, your faith has to be lived out as an individual. You just can't slap a label on something and expect everybody to say, oh, that's how we're all going to follow it. It has to come from the ownership and the people that believe it themselves. You know, second part that came to mind, and a big reason why we don't do it, is because we make mistakes lots of times. Unfortunately, we all do. We're not perfect. And, you know, as we try to make things right, even when we do have a screw up, that we're like, I don't want people to say that. Yeah, I bought it because they had that Jesus fish on their van as they were driving by, and you know, all of a sudden you have employees that may do things differently, and I don't want to, you know, we'll carry our core values out, but it has to be our witness individually that does it. So that's why it's on our core values as far as, you know, where they came from, but anybody can follow them. So yeah, that's a good story, and it's definitely, even today, as we had a close call, you know, out in the factory, if you saw that, I'm like, thank you, Lord, for nobody getting hurt. So I got to depend on Him every day for things on that. Company's evolution and future. As the company approaches its 100-year anniversary, what do you envision for MWI Pumps, and any advice you can share to the next generation?
Well, I keep coming back to that, or I come back to that thought of hearing somebody say, well, that's the way we've always done it. And so I'd say, don't accept that. Just keep asking why, and until you get a good reason. Um, there are things that were done previously that had very good reasons for it. And if you ask enough whys, then you'll get to that. But if there isn't a really good reason, then maybe there are improvements that you can make. Um, One of the things that's another good thing about this company is it's small enough and you're able to make adjustments and things like that. Um, as I was thinking of before, there's more flexibility as an employee of making suggestions or doing things different when you can get those. That's the way we always did it, out of the way. And so that's the only thing I'd suggest to people is, when you have the opportunity, make changes. And that's how we've grown to what we are.
Yeah. I saw you made some notes. Is there anything I didn't cover that you wanted to share?
Yeah. And this may not really be, I call it maybe a sidebar. And I thought at times I've wanted to say something to you and your brother and sister, and say I'd want to talk for a minute about somebody I'd never met, which is your grandfather. And he was gone a few years before I started. And from some of what I heard and talking to people that might have had worked with him in the tail end, I kind of think, well, it's a good thing that I didn't work for him, because he wouldn't have put up with me. He was a hard-nosed guy. But I'll say this about back when he was doing an awful lot here, you didn't have computers. You probably didn't have much for a calculator. Everything was done pretty much with slide rulers. And one of the things that was given to me early on was all these tables of dimensions and values. So for instance, if you were to look up um, the dimensions for doing a 90-degree elbow, there would be all the different sizes and the tabulations of all these dimensions and the values for it. And so I was given the task of verifying a lot of it. And these were things that he had calculated and probably had to do an awful lot, either with a slide ruler by hand or a very simplistic calculator. And some of these things required a fair amount of trig or things like that. And yeah, I found a few mistakes, but not much. But he was really good at getting all that stuff done. And another thing about him was, I remember walking around in the shop. There was a number of things that he created to fabricate things. And one of them that I always remember was the elbow-matic. And I'd stand in this contraption. When I say stand in, it's, you could stand where an elbow, a piece of tube or a cone was that was going to be cut into segments to be turned into an elbow or an intake bell and so on. And I'd look at all the chains and all of this to pull the torch head around and follow it around to do the cutting. And I go, how do you even think of this, much less build it? And that's what he did. He was just kind of like a mechanical genius at the same time. So you have some pretty good DNA in you.
Yeah, yeah. I think that and that inside compulsion to invent things, that Marlon had and that my dad had, that definitely I have as well.
Yeah.
And that when you and I work together on developing new products and stuff like that, the excitement, the back and forth that comes along with it. Yeah, that's something I think that's passed on in your genes somewhat. But yeah, it was a shame he passed away way too soon. I think he'd be hard-nosed on a lot of stuff. I have no doubt about that, but I think he'd be really excited about some of the tools and machinery that we have today that we get to play around with in that shop.
I know that he and your dad are looking down and saying, kids are doing pretty good. Yeah, when I started out with working with your dad, I won't say we didn't lock horns a few times. We did battle over a few thoughts on how to do things, how to measure stuff, but there was a lot of mutual respect. I think he trusted me a lot, and same with me for him. So even we would come to a good agreement toward the end. Another thing, just as far as the lineage from him to your dad to you guys, I've watched you guys obviously grow up here, and see how you became adults and became parents. And I've seen how you are as parents. And I think you guys are all exceptional parents. You're doing pretty good at keeping your kids pretty well based and having good values. And unfortunately, that's kind of lost in a lot of places. So again, your dad, your grandfather looking down and saying, you're doing a good job.
Thank you very much, Jim. You should, if you're out in the shop, you should look for a piece of that peanut butter sheet cake that Hoyt made last night and brought in to everybody. So yeah, he went home over to our house last night and made a whole big old peanut butter sheet cake. He said to share with everybody today. So yeah.
Well, this group was probably already gone.
Yeah, well, Brett had a piece a little bit earlier. Was it good?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Good. Well, thank you very much, Jim, for all the time that you've given us of your time and of your life and to this company. So it's very, very appreciated. One of the things we're having people do at the end, because we're going to try to clip these together, is just look into the camera and wish the company a happy birthday if you want to for hitting our 100 years.
Really? Yeah. Well, happy birthday, MWI. It's been a long haul, and there's more to come. So happy birthday.
Thank you, Jim.